Hey, welcome to the Ministry Mix podcast, where we're bringing you real conversations for the souls and strategies of ministry leaders. I'm Phil Gifford, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Richard Pope.
Hello!
So whether you are a seasoned pastor or a ministry leader or just stepping into leadership for the first time, we're here to share stories, insights, practical tips, and lessons to help you lead strategically while also caring for your soul. In each one of these episodes, we dive into topics that help and matter to your mission, your calling, and your own personal growth. Today, I'm not only joined by my co-host, Richard Pope, I'm joined by our friend, Charles Campbell. Charles, we are super excited to have you here. We're doing our first experiment recording through Zoom. And so if you are a listener and you're wondering why it sounds different or what's going on, it's because we're experimenting with some technology. So
Charles is our guinea pig.
Charles is our guinea pig. We needed somebody who was gracious enough to us to still be our friend if we botched this recording terribly. So, Charles, this is exciting to have you here. We've talked about doing a podcast forever, and there are so many things that we could talk about with you. But I'm excited about the topic we have today. Would you do me a favor, though, Charles? Would you just tell us who you are, what you do, and some of your hobbies that we're going to be talking about?
Absolutely. So, married to Candy, 37 years. 3 girls, so 2 son-in-laws, 3 granddaughters. So the only way you get into our family is marry in. It's if you're a guy, right? So, and then I work for Sin Network, and I have a fancy new title, Director of Development Equipping. But I think basically it's still I'm doing training and coaching. So anything related to training and coaching, my team's involved. So that's what I do. And then hobby wise, so I love to do CrossFit. I picked up pickleball recently. I've joined the club, right? So and then my wife and I, we have an heirloom apple orchard that we started 5, almost 6 years ago. And that's probably going to become a full-time job by the time I retire. So,
I love
it.
The apples are delicious. I do need
the apple. They are. In fact, I've got one sitting right here beside me that I've been working on. So, a little
Richard,
Arkansas black.
Have you had one of those before, Richard?
Yes.
I was being trained by Charles Campbell in Alpharetta, and he gave me apples. I also have a beanie from the orchard, so I'm a real fan, Phil. You're a poser.
Yeah.
I've known Richard for probably 5 more years than you. Or not Richard.
You have.
For 5 more years. I can tell you I've never tried one of his apples or had one of his apples. So I feel a little...
It's a timing issue, Phil. So you have to you have to be in the room with me somewhere between early October through the middle of November to get an apple. So that's the only time of year that, I'm handing them out. So
well, in my or your defense, when we were going to be together in Alpharetta, that was the one time I got COVID during that season and couldn't come.
You did.
So
you
it
did.
was actually my fault.
You were supposed to be there.
Yeah.
With us.
He was. That's right. He would have gotten a sample.
That's what you get for licking doorknobs, bro. You catch COVID.
Don't think that's how I got COVID. I think it was my son who went to middle school, brought it home to share with the family. So,
well, that's almost the same thing. So
you're not wrong.
It's almost worse.
It is.
Charles, you've been super influential in my life from when I met you first, going through some Send Network training, learning how to train adults and learning how to walk through and train church planters. And so been able to serve with you and work with you in a part-time capacity. And Richard's the same way. I know he's gone through the training. So you've been involved and influential in our lives. And like I said before, there are a ton of things we could talk with you about, and maybe we'll bring you back on and do more. We could talk about pastoring and training, the brain and learning, just some of the things you've just been so expert, you've had such expertise in. But today we're gonna talk today about apples and your
apples,
your apple orchard. So I love this because we tend to think about growing in our faith, growing in leadership, growing with God. And we think about, very specific places where we do that. Like we buy a John Maxwell book, or we buy this latest leadership magazine, or this specific podcast. And like, there's lanes and spaces that we're looking to learn about our leadership or learning about our faith in other areas. But there's a lot of areas, if we open up our eyes, that we can take away lessons and learn about leadership. And so you've given us, you have 4 leadership lessons you want to share that you've mentioned from the time on your apple orchard that we're excited to hear from.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a crazy journey because we just started this whole thing as a hobby. And then it's just kind of continued to grow. I keep convincing my bride to add more trees. And so, we were going to stop at 50 and then we were going to stop at 60 and now we're at 65. And I'm like, she needed to replace one this year. And so I was like, the shipping cost on one versus four is not really that much different. So why don't we just add three more,
Yep.
So I think we're close to the stopping point. So, but anyway, so 69 trees. We'll have 69 trees in the spring. So, which doesn't sound like a lot if you're from like upstate New York, where they grow them by the thousands, and everybody's got an apple tree in their yard. But for most of the rest of the country, when we say we have 69 trees, people are like, "Oh my, that's just sounds like a lot."
I have
So,
three. I have three in my backyard.
yeah, yeah. So, and the fact that you have three makes you an unusual dude. So, like, because most people don't even have, one or even know about one. So,
Wait,
but
Phil, do you have apple trees in your backyard?
Yeah,
he
they're
does.
they're
He
very
does.
thick, but they are apple trees.
So you really
So,
need this. You really need this podcast. You got to get them healthy.
Just strategic.
that's right. That's right. That's right. He's going to get some extra
Mhm.
orchard help, Richard, on this whole thing. So,
Good, good.
but as the orchard has gone along over these last 5 years, 5, 6 years, there's just been some things that it has taught us. There are things that it's reaffirmed to us, reminded us from Scripture, and so I just find myself drawing upon it more and more when I do training, when I do some writing, when I just talk about my own faith journey. So I'm just going to run down through the four real quickly, and then we can kind of unpack each one,
Yeah.
and go. So the first one is the super obvious one. It's the whole idea of being grafted in. So apple trees, if you want the same variety, you don't plant the seeds from the apple in that tree because the seeds in the apple from the tree will be a different variety. Most people don't realize that. But when you think about it in the context of like family, um, like you and Pam kids are not identical copies of you and Pam, right?
Right.
Uh, so it's the same thing in an apple tree. So that the seeds are going to be different. They'll retain some of the same genome of the apple. So if you want the identical apple, you have to take a part of that tree and graft it into another tree. So there's that whole idea of being grafted into God's family. So that's just kind of one, and we'll come back to that. And then just the whole reminder from John 15 that like apart from me, you can do nothing. You're the vine, I'm the branches. So like if I cut a limb off a tree, like that limb's going to die unless it's grafted back into the source. So that's just kind of one obvious lesson. But when you see it in front of you each and every day, it's just a great reminder. The second one is a continuation of that John 15 passage, the whole idea of pruning. For an apple tree to produce even better fruit the following year, more fruit the following year, every winter you have to cut that thing back. You have to prune it back. If not, you'll end up having like a sick, decaying, messed up tree. So for instance, Phil, the trees in your backyard, that's part of the issue. There probably needs to be a good prune job that happens to them, right?
Absolutely.
So that's the second lesson. And we'll talk about that more in a second, but just that idea that, man, that branch produced a lot of apples this year, but it's growing in the wrong direction or it's in the wrong place for the overall health of the tree. It's got to go. So that was the second lesson. The third one happened to us this year. Sometimes the unexpected just happens, and so for us this year, we knew they were coming. We just didn't know how severe they were going to be, and that was in central Illinois, there was a confluence of the 13-year cicada and the 17-year cicada. They all emerged at the same time this year. So we literally had thousands of cicadas on the property this year. And they did significant damage to our trees. And we did all we could to protect the ones that we could. And then the rest of them just had to kind of fend for themselves. And so we lost a lot of fruit this year because of that unexpected event. At the same time, like the overall lessons that we learned from that of having to prune way back, like some trees that we thought we were going to get fruit from, we ended up just having to prune way back, but we're seeing even better growth come out of that same tree. So there's some lessons there in life. Quite honestly, watching Richard's journey, the unexpected things of cancer coming and going and coming and going. God's going to be pruning you for a season that you weren't planning for, you weren't expecting it. So how do you embrace that and trust the Father long term? So that was that third lesson that we learned. And then lastly, the whole idea of a tree can look really, really healthy, but if it produces bad fruit, there's something systemic happening at the root. Mm-hmm. And so this year we had two of our best looking trees. When the fruit first came out, it looked really good. But for whatever reason, we still haven't completely figured it out, but it has something to do with the root system. The apples ripened too early. They rotted on the tree, and they fell off. And we didn't get a single apple off either one of those trees. So there was no lasting fruit because the roots, there's something going on that's systemically wrong with those two trees, and we're trying to figure it out. So if you're rooted in the wrong things, you might produce some fruit, but again, it's the whole parable of the soil, right? Or even Psalm chapter 1. So those are the four lessons that, just kind of real quickly, just the idea of the graft, the idea of the prune, the idea of the unexpected, and the idea of the rooted, that are just teaching us just every day when we go out there and look at it, because it's right there in front of us, So,
Dude, Charles, what's so crazy, and Phil and I had talked about this a little bit, for a podcast about ministry leadership, talking about an apple orchard probably is a little like, what the heck are these guys up
it's
to?
like, where's this coming from? Yeah, exactly.
It's like a fever dream. But what I will say, even just those four lessons, and I think part of it, just to throw honor at you, you have a unique ability to like make everything a lesson. I learned that when I was with you. Like we're eating wings at the local in Alpharetta, and you're like talking about the most prolific things I've ever heard. But even just then, you're describing those four lessons, and I'm like, man, that sounds like the last 3 months of church planting for me. Like so relevant, so applicable. I really resonated with that. Like if there's unhealthy fruit, even if there's a lot of it, there's something systemically wrong. Yeah, like I don't know, Phil. I have like 20,000 questions now, so I'll let you take over. But I'm ready for Charles to just teach us. We could just cancel the podcast. It's his now.
Well, hey, with the recorders on, well, let's just keep going. Well, I do think it's interesting because, we all read our Bibles and we're teaching it regularly, and we see Jesus's pictures that are so agriculturally driven, from grafting, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Like you've already mentioned John 15, like conceptually, I read that and I know what that looks like, but you've seen that happen. And so I just feel like you've seen that happen, and like in Jesus's day, they depended on that happening. And it's like just learning what that actually looks like in a more tangible way. I've done some pruning, and you're right. My apple trees, they are, a rumor has it, I don't know what variety they are. So that's partially why I don't care for them well, because I don't know.
Right.
But there's a lesson there. I don't know what they are. So I'm having a hard time getting them healthy. So, but I think they're dwarf trees, so they're supposed to be small, and they are no longer small. And so,
so
I've got to really bring them down. So, but again, I love this picture because it's really in some ways putting some of Jesus's own pictures that you're seeing played out into leadership. So,
well, and again, like for me, like just the idea of the graft. So, I tried my hand at grafting this year. My kids bought me a little grafting toolkit. I went and bought a bundle of rootstock. I took some clippings off my trees. I cut everything, put it together like I thought I was supposed to, wrapped it up, put it in the pots that they were supposed to let it grow. And I didn't do something right, because none of my grafts took. and all of the once healthy branches died because they weren't grafted in properly. And so, I mean, there's a lesson in that. So I got 10 stitches out of the deal. So, where I filleted my finger open trying to graft. But, just being able to see that, like, literally, if I go out and cut a branch off a tree, that branch is just not going to grow anymore. I mean, it's going to die. I can put it in cold storage. I can keep it in stasis for a while, but eventually, if it's not reattached to the source, if it's not reattached to the trunk, or the vine, to use the biblical language, it's going to die. And so that whole abiding, um, I was on a call with Daniel Henderson that's been just wrecking our network with this whole idea of praying the word. And Daniel's got a book out called Glorious Finish, I think. And Daniel was talking to us about it's a daily choice.
Mm.
Do you worship the king or do you neglect the king? And if you continue over time, keep neglecting the king, that leads to other things, which leads to other things, which leads eventually to dishonorable discharge. Or to use Jesus's language, it leads to death, because apart from me, you can do nothing. And so I think that's just, yeah. So I get to see that every day. I get reminded just by walking out my door and seeing these 65 plus trees, that the branches that stay attached, they're going to continue to grow and bear fruit.
Mm.
And so as an everyday believer, not just a pastor, planter, trainer, or planters, just take it down to the basics. As an everyday believer, my job, my role is to
Mm.
abide, and then choose to daily wake up and worship my king.
And
That's the assignment that he's given me,
I think that's so
so
practical for ministry leaders, because we tend to focus on the product and the results.
absolutely.
Like, what are we
Yeah.
doing? What are we getting? How's the ministry doing? What's our numbers? What's our effectiveness? But one of the best things and most strategic things we can do as ministry leaders is making sure our people are abiding and helping them to abide, so that they're
Yeah.
not getting the, because I would imagine that those branches don't die right away. They show
No, yeah, yeah,
life for a
yeah.
season.
They'll hang on. Yeah, they'll hang on. But not for very long.
Yeah.
And like I said, you could put them in stasis. You could put so you can put it's called scion wood. So like I belong to an heirloom Facebook group, and so people are always saying, "Hey, can you send me some scion wood?" Well, so like December to January, I could go out there and I could clip segments of a tree off, wrap it a special way, make sure it stays moist, put it in refrigerator, keep it cool, and
Mm.
it basically kind of goes into a coma, if you will. Okay. So while it's not dead, uh, it's not producing any fruit, and it's not going to produce any fruit. So even though it might have some life to it, it's still not going to produce any fruit because it's not attached.
Yeah.
So I think, we have a lot of people out there in the world that are like, the Walking Dead. They're not dead, but they're also not in a place where they're going to produce any fruit because they're not attached to the vine.
Mm.
So even in those kind of lessons, I mean, those are the things that the orchard just keeps reminding me and teaching me on the regular. So
I think what's interesting about what you just said, Charles, this idea that this once fruitful thing is now no longer
mhm,
fruitful, like,
mhm,
but it's the same thing. You know what I mean? Like,
mhm.
its
Yeah,
makeup hasn't changed, but its connection has changed.
exactly.
And I just think of, having the opportunity with Sun Network now, being a planter, but getting to work with planters. So often when we have a planter who starts getting, into some trouble, yellow, red,
Yep.
spiritually, emotionally,
Yeah.
one of the questions that we're asking them is, hey, what does your devotion time look like? What does your spiritual habits
Yeah.
look like? And
Yeah.
I don't want to, give a weird productive prosperity gospel like
Hmm.
gimmick where I say your connection to Christ will directly impact the influence of your ministry. But to some degree, I do believe, you're not going to bear healthy fruit if you're not connected to the source.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your word picture there of it's frozen, it's in a coma, it's not dead, but it's not producing fruit. I think oftentimes ministry leaders are so focused on productivity that they forget that the quality of the product matters. And
Absolutely.
that's not our product,
Yeah.
right? It's the
Yeah.
gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's so good.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And even if you do continue, like going all the way down to the last lesson of rooted, like there can be from a distance, like if you look through this one tree, it's the largest tree in the orchard.
Mm.
uh like when it's first blooming out, the blooms are beautiful, the leaves are beautiful, and when it starts bearing fruit, the fruit is just absolutely gorgeous. It produces these big bright red apples. But the type of tree it is, the apples have to go from bright red to the ripened fruit looks like a deep purple apple, almost like a prune, like a or plum, not a prune, like a deep purple. So for a season, it looks like it's producing phenomenal fruit. And so how many leaders do we look at from afar and we go, wow, their ministry is phenomenal. The fruit that they're producing, it looks like it's phenomenal. But then in the end, Daniel Henderson would say they've experienced a dishonorable discharge because they become found out. And there's a moral failure that's been lurking in the background that they've compartmentalized, and they've kept it out of the limelight, and they've separated it, and they've made excuses for it or whatever. But the fruit is rotten. But from a distance, you would go, man, I want a bite of that. Give me that apple. And then you get over and you grab it off the tree, and it's mush in your hands, and you're like, what in the world? Because there was a systemic issue. And their root system was not rooted and grounded in Jesus, either in the word. Daniel would say either in the word or prayer. Something was missing. And so
It's a good reminder for us that look objectively at ministry, and this is healthy, this is not, this is big, this is not, this is not.
Yeah.
And you're like that long-term faithfulness that we want to see in both ourselves as ministry leaders, but also our churches as organizations, helping them to see the fruit toward the end, get it all the way.
Absolutely. And the cool thing about like even that example is that like we haven't given up on that tree. We're gonna try to figure out what's wrong, and how much more so does the Father do that with us? Like if we are truly His, the Father doesn't give up on us. The Father continues to discipline and to bear down on us to remove, which goes to the pruning example, cut away so that we can bear more fruit, proper fruit. So even more so than, because eventually, that tree, it's got maybe 2 or 3 more seasons. And if something doesn't get, if we don't figure out what's going on and it just keeps doing this year after year, we'll be like, okay, maybe it's just it's in the wrong environment. And, we rip it out. So thankfully the Father doesn't do that, for truly His. So
I think you see almost a bit of shepherding, like a picture is there too. Like you got this broken tree, and you're not just immediately chopping it down. Like you're not immediately giving up on it. You're trying to diagnose where's the problem, where's
what's going on,
the system, what's going on. Is it a season? And ultimately, I think even that whole question it might be in the wrong environment. Like this is just not the most fruitful place for you. I think that's a great picture of what we do with people.
I think you're right. And especially like with church planners. I mean, sometimes church planners, like, they're working really hard. They're being faithful to the task. And it's just wrong guy, wrong place. The context. So context is important for some of those guys. Like we have one of the, we have this one little tree, and it's supposed to look like, when you look at it, you're like, oh, you just planted that. It's like, no, that's actually a 3-year-old tree. Well, it looks like all your 1-year-old trees. We're like, yeah, it's struggling, because it's an English tree. So it likes a wetter, cooler climate than what we give it here in Illinois. And as I'm in central Illinois. And so we're hanging on to it. We're doing everything we can to try to, because we know what the apples taste like on that tree, and they're really, really good, and we'd like some. So but sometimes it is, that's another lesson that's not one of the 4, but and so how do you come along and either be patient because that it's just going to take longer for that guy to root in and to bear fruit, or you help put it in it, you help him go to an environment that's a better contextual fit, so So bonus number 5, a bonus number 5. So
that one was for free.
There you go.
There you go. Exactly.
I want to.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The one that always though that has just been the best lesson for me over and over again is that whole pruning lesson. Um, like we had a tasting last night, so we had 30 people out of the orchard doing a tour of the orchard, and I was just walking them around some of the 5-year-old trees and just saying, "Hey, see that really big branch right there? Well, I'm probably going to cut it off this next year, even though it produced a lot of fruit. It's not where it needs to be. And so for this tree to really do better next year, that branch has to go. And so that lesson again from John 15, that sometimes pruning has to take place, and for you to be ready for the next season that God has in store for you, you may be in a season right now of Him pruning away even parts of your character and parts of your skill set that you thought were going to be like the most productive things that you would ever do, so that in the next season of life there's room for new growth to take place and new learning to happen, so that you can be who God needs you to be in the next season.
Mm.
And so I think sometimes we always apply pruning to, well, it's it's the bad branch, it's the unhealthy branch that I need to prune away. But also sometimes it's the things that are just kind of good, but they're not best, that the Father needs to clear out of our lives, so that there's room for Him to make us look more fully like He needs us to look, like how He needs us to reflect Him.
Mm.
And so sometimes it is those quote unquote good things. Um, you know, what is it? Hebrews 11, the sin that entangles, but the things that hinder, it's
Mm.
those things that hinder, uh, you know, and sometimes it may be a good thing, but it's not the best thing,
Wow.
and so,
Super practical.
yeah, well, and again, that's where, you know, like the week that I prune around here it's somewhat depressing, because because I'm out there cutting back the tree, and I'm just like, I don't think I should cut that. But then the guy that was teaching me to prune, he's like, nope, you need to keep going. You haven't cut back far enough yet. I was like, are you sure? Are you sure the growth's going to come back this next year? Are you sure the tree's going to really bloom and really do what it's supposed to do? And then he'll just kind of have me scan the orchard. He'll be like, okay, look back at your 1-year-old trees. Now look at your 5-year-old trees. Trust the process.
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, you're right. Okay. And so get the pruners back out and start going at it again.
That's
Uh,
that's such a word. Hey, I have a super practical question, if that's okay, boss man Phil.
You're good.
ask
Uh,
away. Ask away.
Charles, so you gave us 4 lessons. Uh, Pick one that's your favorite, and then I want to ask this question, and you pick one that's your favorite. You have a
Okay.
young ministry leader, right? So we aim our audience not just at pastors, but also the
Yeah.
deacons, the team coordinators, the
Mhm.
missionaries, etc.
Yeah.
Could you just take one of those lessons and just super practically apply it to like your first year in ministry? You know what I mean? Like everything's
Oh,
broken.
yeah.
You say you're
Yeah.
giving announcements, and instead of saying luncheon, you say luncheon. Like all
Mhm.
the awkward things that happened in the first year of ministry.
Richard, is
Could
that
you
a
apply
personal experience from your
it
life?
is. It is. It
Yeah.
was so embarrassing. I peed a little, but it's fine. It's fine. Could you just apply like one of those lessons to that first year in ministry?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, um, yeah, again, I think for me, that favorite lesson, Rich, is what we were just talking about with the pruning. I think for a young ministry leader, I think sometimes we we do two things. We either overestimate or underestimate. And for the guy that
Mm,
overestimates, just be prepared, because the Father is not going to let you just continue to overestimate your what you think you bring to the table, because we have been so ingrained from the beginning of our lives to gravitate towards independence. And oftentimes for young ministry leaders, they buy into that. I bought into that because I mean, even into later in life, I would walk into a room, I would listen to somebody speak on the stage or speak from, you know, be leading a training or whatever. And the first thought of my mind wasn't, gosh, I wish I could do that, or gosh, Father, I enjoy whatever. It would be like, I could do that better. I wish that guy would get off the stage. He didn't even frame his post-its. Come on, or whatever, and so, and it's this whole, I've got this, Father, putting our hands up, and kind of like a little 3-year-old does with their mom and dad. The first word they learn is like, no, 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 no. We do that to God so often, Richard. And so I think God's just going to prune that away. He's going to prune that pride away. He's going to help us recognize, which ties back into the first lesson of staying connected and abiding.
So good.
So I think for a ministry leader, don't overestimate, and like recognize you are completely different. You are completely dependent. Apart from me, you can do not just a little, not just an idiot, you can do nothing. And so just remind yourself daily, Father, I'm completely dependent on you for my heart to beat, for my lungs to have breath, for the words that I say, even in this moment on this podcast. I'm completely dependent on you to keep my thoughts clear, And so for that young ministry leader, man, just don't forget that you are extremely dependent. And
So
the
good.
older you get and the more mature you get, maturity doesn't look like greater independence. Maturity looks like greater dependence. That's maturity in the kingdom, is
That's so
greater
good.
dependence. So that would be, if I could go back and teach my 20-year-old self, 25-year-old self, 30-year-old self, 35-year-old self, dude, quit being so arrogant and prideful, and recognize how dependent you truly are on God.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all I got, man. But yeah. So that's my favorite lesson. And that's the one I personally have to lean into on a regular basis. So, cause even in my current role, when I first started this job at NAM, I got to work for Mac Lake for 2 years. And I mean, like, so some people may not know who that is, but like, he's just like a premier leadership development guy. And for 2 years, I was on this phenomenal team, and we just, we thought we were all that, and in one sense we were, because there was some really cool stuff happening. Okay. But it was so easy to get filled, for me personally, to get filled with pride, because the way we were training had really shaped me and changed me. And so I kind of like, how we laugh at caged Calvinists. I became a caged trainer, and so, but all it was just arrogance. It was just arrogance and pride, and the Father just had to do a work in me to remind me that whole dependence lesson.
Wow.
So
good. And I love, Richard, you mentioned this even at the beginning. It feels like the 4 lessons Charles Juice brought out have been things we've experienced within the last year in our churches. I mean, we've experienced a need for dependency and what it looks like when we're not there, grafting and dependency on God. We've experienced pruning in either ourselves, sometimes in our organizations, like families leave or things happen. The unexpected has happened in both my church plant and Richard's church plant. You're going to hear about that in a future episode.
You mean disappearing buildings?
Yeah, buildings that just go away, air conditioning
exactly.
So
Yeah.
And it's discouraging when all of a sudden, like, you have no control over the timing of cicadas in Illinois. You just got to adapt. You just got to adapt and stay faithful.
Yeah.
That sounded like a horror movie, by the way. Thousands of cicadas sounds horrible.
Let me talk about that season for just a short second.
We're good.
Dude, it was depressing. I mean, like, every night after they had disappeared, we thought we had controlled the damage. And because what they do is that the females, they basically, it's like they have a razor blade on the bottom of their bellies, and they just slit the branch. They just slit it, and then they lay all their eggs in those branches. Well, if they do enough of, if they do it far enough up and down the branch under any kind of load will eventually just break. It just snaps. Plus 2, like, all of those eggs that they hatched, once they, hatch, and they just drop straight to the ground, and then they're going to come back up in either 13 or 17 years. So you're also trying to prevent that. So every night we would walk the orchard, and I'd have, my pruners in my hand, and we'd be lifting up the bottom sides of the branches, looking to see where we had damage. And it just seemed like every branch that had an apple on it had gotten hit, with our smaller trees. And so every night, my wife's name is Candy. Candy would be like, please don't tell me, I was like, you don't want to see it. And it was just like, it felt like just like fruit carnage, right? Because there was just, I would walk a tree and I just literally have to cut off almost every branch that had fruit on it, and some of the trees were trees that like we've been waiting for 3 years for this tree to bear one apple, right? So and we were looking forward to eating that apple, and we got to wait one more year.
No.
But it's okay, because I kept here's the lesson in that. I kept telling her, we're playing the long game. That's the lesson. We're playing the long game. And in our walk with Jesus, while there's an urgency in sharing the gospel, faithful walking with him is a long game.
Yeah.
And so in those seasons where the unexpected happens, where overnight you lose a building or you lose a key family, or you experience some, catastrophic illness, or whatever else may come at you, we're in this for the long game. And so I'm going to cut this branch way back this season, and then be dependent on the Father to do what only the Father can do. And that's grow that tree, put that new growth back on there. There's nothing I can do to produce the new growth. My job was to prune it back. And his job is going to be to provide the growth. And so to trust him, to let go, or be patient with, okay, Father, this wasn't what I thought was going to happen, but it happened. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to have this joyful expectation of what you have in store for me, or for us as a church family or a city, because this happened for a reason. I don't know what the reason looks like right now. I can't answer that question, but I know you've allowed it to happen, but I know you're good and faithful and right and just, and I'm going to trust in you and your character, because I just don't understand my circumstance, So
I think you're right though. When that unexpected happens, it is like, I think you have to be honest with that discouragement. Like, this stinks.
Absolutely.
We've invested years in these trees, and we are hoping that this was the year.
This was the year. Exactly.
I mean, how many times have we said, this is the outreach event, this is the ministry,
exactly,
this is the season for our church, and all of a sudden the weird happens, or the tragic happens, or the unexpected happens. And I love that lesson. We're in it for the long game. Like, in a year, we still want a church to be here doing ministry in this community, or want you to still be here leading in this way.
Yep.
What a great lesson. Well, I should say this. We're going to wrap up, because we're way over our normal episode time, which is great, because the one complaint I've gotten from our first 5 episodes is that they're too short. People are like,
there we go.
I'm just getting in. So we're gonna give you a little extra bonus content.
We're giving you what you want.
That's right. We listen to our listeners. Hey, Charles, before we go, what's your favorite apple to eat? And I know that's probably a loaded question, because it's like asking what your favorite candy is. Like, what are you in the mood?
Yeah. So I've got 2.
Okay.
So one is also Richard, the one I gave to Richard, that Roxbury Russet. So
good.
Oldest apple in North America, 1666 was when it was first discovered. It tastes like a starburst. Okay, legit. When you bite into it, sweet, sour, perfect mix of the two. And then the second one's probably the Baldwin. My wife and I both, we like a really multi-faceted apple flavor, and the Baldwin is another one, which up where you guys live, you can actually still find Baldwins growing in a lot of mom and pop orchards. So it's a still pretty popular apple up in the Northeast. So so it's really big, but it's sweet, sour sweet as well, more sweet than sour, but it's a good one too. So it's a good one to eat with caramels. Bite a caramel, eat the apple. Bite a caramel, eat the apple. Can't go wrong.
Well, hey, thank you guys for listening today. I bet you learned more than you ever thought you were going to learn about apples, apple growing, and hopefully saw some
cicadas.
The cicadas.
Cicadas, exactly.
I hope you saw some connections between what Charles is doing in his apple orchard and what you're doing as you lead in ministry. I'd encourage you, open up your eyes as you go through life. There are practical examples that God has put all around you to help you to lead, to grow, to stretch your faith, to help you see pictures of Jesus and God's work. So walk around the world with your eyes open, and let's continue to learn and grow together. So thanks for listening. I hope this has been a great episode. If you found this discussion helpful, make sure you like and subscribe this podcast. You don't want to miss an episode, especially as we continue to pump out content this fall for you guys. And also take a minute and leave a review. Let us know how we can help. Give us some feedback so we can help more leaders like you. If you got questions or any topics you'd like to hear more about, be sure to connect with us on social media. Let us know. But until next time, let's keep leading with purpose and caring for your soul along the way. Thanks for listening.
Bye.